I decided to call this presentation AI-Facilitated Sensemaking as Civic Infrastructure, and actually it's partially inspired by the conversation that we had with Benjamin. I think it was like a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, in general, I'm very interested in this domain of facilitation, and I'm very interested in this whole domain of civic infrastructure, or how I call it sometimes citizen infrastructure. And so this overlap or intersection is probably one of the most interesting things for me personally. So yeah, like just start with some, I guess, obvious problem statements. Like we have a lot of different tools, and most of them are pretty outdated, like forums, surveys. They don't give us nuance. They can be very scalable, especially surveys, but they don't give us actual like deep insights. And on the other hand, we have proper sense-making process like interviews, workshops, citizen assemblies, but they are very hard to scale. They are very expensive. They need facilitators or consultants, and it's hard to coordinate, and like people need to find time that would work for everyone in the group and so on. So I think public sense-making needs to become this kind of legitimate public infrastructure, like roads or plumbing or, libraries. And I think that's what famous German philosopher Jürgen Habermas was advocating for many decades. Unfortunately, he had passed away like 3 days ago. He was 96 years old, and I think he was one of the most, like, he had like one of the longest research tracks among 20th century philosophers. Like he studied under Theodor Adorno, if I'm not mistaken. He was part of this Frankfurt School of Philosophy. I think he started as a Marxist, and then he got disillusioned in Marxism. And he had a lot of different contributions, and he had a lot of famous students. But one of his more, I think, famous contributions is actually what he called like theory of communicative action. And I think that was the source or the inspiration for deliberative democracy that I'm very interested in. I have been very interested in for a few years now. To be honest, I didn't know about Habermas myself until I learned about Habermas machine. Like I'm not going to pretend that I'm this kind of like PhD student that knows like different philosophers. I haven't read Habermas's books, but since I learned about him, I read some of his interviews and like and some articles about him and so on. So I think that he was like genuinely important thinker of the 20th century, and I think his work is not fully appreciated still. And so, yeah, so he asked, like, how do we create the conditions for genuine public deliberation or public sphere so that the democracy could be healthy? Because he was thinking about like the technology and like how this kind of crisis that we live in and so on. And so he thought that it's really important to develop this kind of public sphere. And so I think public sense making is like direct, could be like a direct development of his ideas. And like citizen assemblies, for example, is one of the powerful and I think increasingly popular pattern. I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with citizen assemblies. I've never participated in one, but I would love to do that if I will be able to at some point. But it's not the only pattern, right? Like there's also community notes like on X or structured debates like with like this open to debate platform. There's participatory budgeting. There's like interesting web annotation project called Margin that is using AT protocol. So all of those are forms of public sense making. And so yes, infrastructure communities could build on should be open, composable, interoperable, and all of those different things should work together. And if we focus on deliberative technology in particular, it's also like a growing landscape. And one of my favorite researchers in this field is Lisa Schirch. I think she's from Northeastern University. Oh, sorry, she's from Notre Dame University, and she's like one of the contributors to the open facilitation library that Benjamin mentioned. And so she presented this deliberative stack a few months ago, and I think it's a really useful framework that explains like how different tools can kind of be stitched together and create some kind of synergy to actually support like a full-fledged deliberative process. And so sense making is just one of the elements or one of the layers in that stack. And then within that layer, there's also like at least five different like sub layers, like mapping opinions, evaluating values and moral foundations, evaluating perception gaps, and so on. So if we talk about Harmonica, it's definitely not a Swiss knife. I don't know if anyone is building a Swiss knife. Maybe Google is trying to do that with Jigsaw. I don't know. But I don't want Harmonica to be a Swiss knife. I want Harmonica to be a very focused tool, or maybe a module that can be integrated into the larger stack. And so that kind of informs the product strategy behind the Harmonica. So yeah, so there's also a very interesting organization called AI and Democracy Foundation, started by Aviv Ovadya. It's like a think tank in San Francisco, and they published this really interesting map of like capabilities gap in deliberative democracy. I'm going to share the link in the chat, and then I will also share the slides with you, so you will have those little links in the footers. And so they identified a few different gaps that are relevant to Harmonica and they're relevant to public sense making in general. So those have like, how do we facilitate deliberation with AI? How do we synthesize the nuance? How do we route information dynamically, localize participation, navigate deep divisions? So if you open the link, you will see that there's actually a lot of very like meaty artifacts in that capabilities gap, and it's still work in progress as far as I understand. And I think Kyle Redman is like leading that project at IDF, and I really hope that maybe you can also host Kyle and he will present that map. I think it's really cool. And so like facilitation is a subset of those gaps, or a subset of deliberative tooling. And I think facilitation is one of the hardest things to actually like tackle with technology. It's really like an art form, and the more I talk to facilitators, the more I appreciate that art, or the craft, maybe both. But I think that facilitation is really important for collective sense making. It's like critical. It's a critical capability for collective sense making, because it allows us to tap into tacit knowledge, like something that is not saved or documented. And of course, there's also this generative component where people get inspired by each other and the cross-pollination happens between them. And it's very expensive. And I wonder, yeah, basically, I think Harmonica's thesis is that, yeah, you need facilitation for collective sense making, and if we need to scale collective sense making, we need to scale facilitation. And yeah, so initially this presentation was titled as like something about deliberative polling, and I think that's a really good term. But I think it's like very accurate for political domain, And Harmonica is also thinking about, like, for example, change management, right? It's like when someone is trying to change how teams work in organization. Sometimes it's some kind of agile coach is responsible for that. Sometimes it's maybe like some organizational design consultant, maybe like from The Ready, for example, right? Or some consultancy like that. And so I think that's not exactly deliberative polling, but they have this shared problem or shared some kind of common thread about complexity, and that you need to tap into the tacit knowledge to collectively make sense and align and maybe increase the coherence to actually move forward and like enact the desired change, or like, you know, develop a theory of change together, and so that everyone would be inspired, and so the decisions would be more legitimate and so on. So I think that's this problem area is actually what could be like one of the most underserved needs in governance, especially in Web3 governance. I'm sorry, guys, I know that a lot of you have been spending, like, invested a lot of time into governance, and I really admire some of the work of some of you. But I think that until now, a lot of communities, especially in Web3, have kind of, well, it's understandable because when you don't meet with other people in person, it's very hard to do collective sense making and facilitation, right? But I think that's what we really need, because it feels like a bottleneck that prevents us from good governance. So the ecosystem consists of this, like, a few different tools that are all enabled by the API. So the first thing that I shipped, like, a few weeks ago was Harmonica's API, and then I started building those tools that are using API, which includes MCP server, Telegram bot, Harmonica chat command, and also Harmonica sync, which allows you to sync any session with something, for example, with a GitHub repo. Like if you want to build like a website based on a Harmonica session, you can use Harmonica sync command to synchronize automatically, like as more participants participate, as more users participate, that GitHub repo will update automatically using Harmonica sync. Anyway, the other part of, well, it's not technically part of Harmonica's ecosystem, but it is related. Like it's like a sister project, or this kind of partner project called Open Facilitation Library, which we started in Metagov, and Benjamin was also like one of the founding members of that working group. And we're basically trying to research how to translate the wisdom of specific facilitation traditions into tools for AI facilitators, and also understand how to evaluate those facilitators, including Harmonica, but not only Harmonica. And so I hope that this project will evolve and get some funding, because right now it still doesn't have any funding. It's basically just pure enthusiasm of a few people in this small channel in Metagov Slack. And like just yesterday, we did this really cool session with Maria. She's also one of the contributors to OFL, and she's also a data scientist based in Chicago. And she customized Harmonica pretty heavily to enable like a really cool cross-pollination pipeline, which basically consisted of two different sessions, and like one session fed into the other. And so the other session allowed people to cross-pollinate between each other. And basically we tried to understand if cross-pollination actually helps to like change perspectives of participants. And even though we didn't have a lot of participants yesterday, like 17 only, we could still register that some people actually changed their perspectives on the topic of the deliberation, because Harmonica surfaced other opinions as part of the session. So I think that's really cool. The other project that we are currently doing with Metagov is GovAC, which is like spearheaded by Eugene Leventhal, and it's like a research project focused on Web3 governance, like what are the main challenges and also the most promising solutions for Web3 governance. And it's all feeding into this report that Melinda, yay, Melinda, indeed, is writing for Ethereum Foundation. And so Eugen is facilitating workshops, and some, members of the governance geeks community, they contributed through Harmonica session, but it's not the only way we collect data. And so eventually we hope that all of that will kind of synthesize in a very useful knowledge base, like a public good that can be used by like governance practitioners, funders, and other stakeholders in the ecosystem. And the last slide is just about the ecosystem, or to be precise, the networked cooperative ecosystem. I really like this concept. I read about it in this super inspiring blog post by, oh boy, Rithika Rajamohan. I hope I pronounce her name correctly. I will share the link. Yes, I will share the slides, of course, in the Open Civics group and also in the chat. So basically, she proposed to look into this really cool concept of networked cooperative ecosystems. And there are some really cool examples of that that have nothing to do with Web3. They might not even have something to do with internet, but we could definitely learn from them. And I think that this space that we have been talking about, and I think that Open Civics is like an important player in this space. I think we should try to form this kind of networked cooperative ecosystem, and maybe by using like interoperability protocols like decentralized deliberation standard. I didn't know about it like until like a couple of weeks ago, but it's really cool project by the co-founder of Agora Citizen Network, Nicholas. So it's like could be like this connective tissue that would actually help us integrate or compose from different tools, which I hope will include Harmonica. And also, I think it would be really cool if we could maybe, do some like demo days together with some funders, and it would maybe would be something similar to YC demo days, even though we're not having an accelerator here, but still we could try to like focus the attention of funders on like specific dates, like maybe twice a year or something. And also we could maintain like a shared grants database, and maybe we can have some centralized grants writing service, which I think General Magic used to offer, but then they decided to sunset that service, and maybe we could do something like that. Anyway, I'm just saying that there's a lot of different ways we could cooperate and like build some solidarity, because I think a lot of us are still working in silos, and I would love to stop doing that. And I think that's it.